Welcome to the Podunk Polymath, a podcast dedicated to the sentiments of a secular, sarcastic, screwed-up Southernist JW and skeptic. I'm your host, Chris. Come on in. This is episode 51 of the Triple Po. Thanks again for joining me. Hope y'all are doing super spectacular and had a super spectacular weekend. This week on the pre-ramble, I wanted to talk first about Natalie Newell, good friend of the show and former guest, being on Scathing Atheist. She talked about her documentary Science Moms and other various and sundry subjects, so definitely go check that out. I'll put that link up on the show page, of course. Also, the second iteration of the Atheist at the Pub was Saturday night, this past Saturday night. The show comes out on Monday, so yeah, Saturday night. It was pretty fun. It was a bigger turnout than the last time, and for that I'm grateful. We had about 17 people show up, last count, and it was at a new location, Poorhouse, Nashville. I thought it was a better location. They had better brews, and the food was better, and their patio was cool. I like their patio, and it was a nice night for it. It was like in the 80s, lower 70s. 80s, and everybody had a fun. I thought there was new faces along with some of the old ones from the first one. Carla Lewis was there and her beautiful wife Jamie Combs. Of course, most of y'all will know that Carla was on episode 5. I don't remember what episode, but it was early on when I talked to her. And of course, she's a trans activist here in Nashville. She's been on the news a couple of times talking about, especially when the thing with the trans people being barred from the military, which is complete and utter bullshit, came out. She was there, and she was talking on all the various news platforms around here. And of course, she's a badass and gives zero fucks. And so she said exactly what she thought, which was that it's basically bullshit. And of course, y'all know that already, so I don't have to kind of tell you more about that. Had some other people. I just met so many new people. One with a podcast. She's a trans woman, and she is more like a diary podcast, I think. I need to share that, actually. And I got it last night. I forgot her Pris something. I don't remember. I'll have to look, and I'll put it up. It lasted a good little while. Yours truly had a little bit to drink, if you can believe that. Facebook karaoke was not done, however, because, I have to do the guesting thing, host thing, and that means I can't do shit like that, so. Yeah, it was fun. I encourage y'all, of course, next month will probably be the weekend after Labor Day. So I encourage y'all, if you're in the area or if you're anywhere close, to come out and check it out. I mean, it'll be fun. If this past one was any indication, of course, everybody knows alcohol is a social lubricant, and I saw a lot of cool conversations. I'm going to put pictures up, and I got some video, some Facebook Live stuff. Once I get off my lazy ass to do it, I'll put it up on the Facebook page, and I'll put the live stuff up on YouTube probably. So I know y'all will be looking forward to that because it's going to be super awesome. I also wanted to mention that I was on Brainstorm. They did a live show Friday night, and I was on there talking about, I was on there for a bunch of stuff. They did the woo stuff and fuck somebody, name somebody who you wanted to, fuck them or whatever. And if you'll notice, I progressively got drunker because as the show progressed. And by the time we got to the point where it was one of the subject, which I should go ahead and talk about, the article about, no, I don't have to tell you if I'm trans, if we're dating. Once I got to that point, I was already full of piss and vinegar and alcohol. And so I kind of went off on it. And of course, I said so on my page. There was a lot of uproar about it. Some people, cis people, threw a fit because, God forbid, they'd be uncomfortable while, trans people are actually dying because of it being murdered, brutally murdered, because you're uncomfortable, basically. So I'm not going to get too much more into that because it's all over my Facebook. I actually shared a thread and put it public, which I rarely do, having trans people on my friends list talk about it and what they thought about it. And of course, surprise, it's a little different than what the cis people were saying when I posted it originally. So I think it's important to get all sides, and I understand to a degree that y'all, might be a little iffy on it and that you're being, lied to or whatever. But they're really, unless you're like getting ready to knock it on out or something, they're not, I don't see why they're obliged to tell you anything. I mean, are you obliged to tell somebody you got a small dick beforehand, or that you're a premature ejaculator? No, you don't go around doing that shit, do you? So, yeah, the whole thing really pissed me off, and so, like I said, I kind of went off a little bit on Brainstorm. I don't think the link is up yet because it was a live show. I don't know when it'll go up, but when it does go up, I'll make sure to let y'all know so you can listen to me in my full questionable glory, I guess you could say. So, yeah, kind of a busy weekend for me. I drank quite a bit, and others can be the judge whether that was good or bad. So, you know. So, again, yeah, go check out Natalie's appearance on Scathing Atheist, and make sure you listen to me on Brainstorm. For the palaver this week, I have Michael Schaefer, patron of the show, and we talk about, he's a real estate broker, and we talk about gentrification, pros and cons, and what can be done to do something about it, to kind of make it not so much about developers and more about the people, trying to find a balance there. So it's an interesting conversation. I don't know if we solved anything, but we certainly got the issues out there, and that's what's important. I think y'all agree, and I definitely, if any of y'all have any comments or insights on this subject, let me know, because I really want to learn more about it. So anyway, I hope y'all enjoy it. On to the interview.
Have you heard the Habeas Humor podcast? It's a new legal show with lots of thoughtful analysis.
That must have been like a desert fart of dry excitement.
Famous politicians, or at least people who went to school with them.
And then she says, have you met Barack Obama? And I'm asking, who the heck is Shakalama?
And legal tips. You can still be rapey if your dick doesn't work, the more you know. Disney can't sue me if I don't sing it. HABEASHUMOR.
Hey y'all, this is Tucker from the Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. And I might live in a beer can, but I ain't no inbred redneck. And if you listen to my podcast, I'm gonna learn you something. And no, I ain't talking about how to marry your cousin and not have kids with 16 fingers and stuff like that. I mean, I actually talk about real stuff and teach people where the Bible stole its stories from. So y'all give me a listen, would you? Thank you.
Welcome to another edition of the Palaver here on the Podunk Polymath Podcast. This week I have with me the host of the Reasonable Risk Podcast and current patron and awesome guy, Michael Schaefer. How's it going, Michael?
It's going well, Chris. It's going well. I had a delightful breakfast burrito this morning, so things are going well.
I don't know if delightful and breakfast burrito are two things I would put together necessarily, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've had the wrong kind.
Well, yeah, it could just be that you've had the wrong kind. There's a place out here called Twisters, and if any listeners are in New Mexico, they'll know Twisters. Not that I'm in New Mexico. I'm in Colorado, but we have them here too. And, their breakfast burritos are just absolutely delicious. So I had one, and, that's probably my calorie allotment for about 4 days, but what the hell?
Well, y'all are high all the time out there anyway, so y'all eat anything, probably.
In more ways than one, absolutely.
Alrighty then. Okay, so let's kind of dig into the subject here. We're talking about gentrification, and other people call it, I think, income displacement is a kinder word I read. So first of all, what the fuck is gentrification?
Well, gentrification is, if you think of the word itself, it's an odd kind of I think a speaking down to people type of term, because what it's really saying is this particular area of a city is becoming gentrified. It's becoming higher class. It goes back to sort of your lords and your gentry classes. So basically, it's saying, this poor area is it's getting better. It's being gentrified, which for the most part does mean getting whiter.
No, yeah, I can understand. I mean, that's just a word I know. I mean, I'm sure that, like I said, income displacement's one. There's probably other ways you could term it, but it weren't so emotionally loaded, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's just it's a term that people associate in different ways with it. Obviously, people that are living in those communities prior to gentrification, well, they see it as developers coming in and making their area of town unlivable for them because they're being forced out economically. Other people are seeing it and saying, that was kind of a rough neighborhood and now it's cleaned up. Great. So there are different ways to perceive it and, of course, different effects of it depending on who you are.
Yeah, so it's definitely different perspectives depending upon your group, what group you're in, I guess. So. But the idea of this is to kind of try to see the perspective from the affected communities. I guess you could say the lower income communities, which usually consist of minorities, people of color, and the such like. So I think we need. I don't think
there's another community I think that should also be thought about in there, and it may of course overlap with people of color or economically disadvantaged, but the elderly are another group that are very highly affected by it, because a lot of them may have bought a house in the late 40s or early 50s or something like that, and I can think of particular areas actually specifically where they kind of lived through where the neighborhood got rough, and now it's gentrifying again, but they were there the whole time, and so it does affect elderly, especially fixed income people. Absolutely.
Yeah, I do know that in Nashville proper they have a thing where when you reach a certain age, they freeze your property taxes.
Oh, that's something that they've done in different ways in different places, and it's really a good thing, because there isn't actually property taxes are one of the things that are one of the issues with gentrification, and we have something like that in Colorado where there's a senior exemption. If you've lived there for over 10 years, I think it is, and you're over 62 or 65, you get a break on your property taxes. So that's an area where government can do some things on the margins to help people be able to stay in areas where they might otherwise be priced out of, even if they've already owned the house for years and years.
Right. So let's go ahead and talk about, first of all, let's talk about the pros, I guess, of
sure.
What would you think of some of the pros of it?
Well, certainly when you have an area that is a lower income area, it's hard to attract businesses to the area. And so you end up with things like food deserts are a big problem, where you don't have a large grocery store or fresh markets or things like that in wide areas of cities, because there isn't the economic base to support it. So as new development comes in, as a wealthier demographic comes in, there are some benefits like that to the people of the original community that are still there. There are definitely benefits as far as what's provided in the neighborhood, be it shopping, retail, parks, schools, things like that.
Right. Okay. And I've seen that myself, because Nashville is one of the most rapidly gentrifying cities in the nation, I think.
Yeah, I know that I've read a lot and heard from some people I know, like in the music business, that Nashville is, you've got some real super wealth there now, in pockets, and that's it's making it a really attractive city because of the music explosion. In a lot of ways, music productions all moved to Nashville, even rock. Yeah,
people seem to think it's all in country, but
no,
it is.
Yeah, not
really
at all.
Music,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So there are some benefits to it. You certainly wouldn't say that you want a neighborhood to stay the way that it is forever if legitimately a reasonable person would say, hey, this is a blighted area. It's tough to get new investment into that community, and there can be self-generated investment. There's a lot of good small businesses from that community, and in some, there's always winners and losers, and there may be some loss of that. But looking at it overall for the community, there may be some good things too.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think for myself, I see the, like you said, the area gets better. They could have more parks, trees. Things just generally look better. Things are more clean, I guess you could say. I don't know. Things aren't as run down looking. I mean, some of the buildings are,
right. You get some renovations. An old retail strip center with a refacing and redoing the parking lot. It can look new when it looked terrible a month ago. So there are smaller investment things like that can really help. As far as the flip side of it is from the perspective of the community, that the original community there, of course, is if they aren't property owners themselves, if they don't own a home, they quickly can get priced out of their own neighborhood. As rents rise, different areas have rent control and things like that. But absent that kind of intervention, it can get too expensive for someone to live in their own area very quickly.
Right. And I think we're kind of going maybe into a little of the cons of so-called gentrification, which, like you said, include prices going up to the point where people who lived there before it happened being priced out. Yeah. And there's a couple of things to that too. It does depend on what's the mix of homeowners to renters. There are a lot of communities that are ripe for gentrification where they do have a lot of homeowners. Homeowner occupants is what I'm referring to there, versus renters. And those homeowner occupants can do very well by selling. Obviously, if they decide they want to sell their place, that could literally be their retirement there. So that's something that has to be considered also, is these people that have lived there and they've had this house in this neighborhood for 30, 40 years. Well, now all of a sudden the land under it's worth a lot more. And so that does help, an elderly person that's lived there have what they need to get through the rest of their lives. Things like that. Yeah, but a lot of times they don't want to move.
True. Absolutely. And
they're attached to it.
Yeah, and that's where I think that there's a point in the gentrification discussion that I think crosses over to changes in neighborhoods just through aging demographic rather than income demographic, where you do have some of the older population that they don't want to leave their neighborhood. They want to be able to stay there. They want to be able to continue to live there even as the neighborhood around them might be changing. But a lot of times their kids, maybe the next generation or two generations, they don't always want to necessarily live in that same neighborhood. And so we see sort of a split there where there's a portion of the community that wants to stay and a portion of the community that wasn't going to stay regardless. So they might not have the option at some point if real estate just becomes too expensive in that neighborhood. But I think that sometimes it's all conflated together. And in reality, I think that we probably need to look at a few different areas and aspects of it, because we do hear the side of it's breaking apart the communities. We don't have our community living here anymore. Some of that is generational churn, and that's where I have some pushback against forces that are against development. Is sometimes I think that there's pieces to why a neighborhood's changing that's beyond just the economics.
I can understand that. Yeah. So, like we said, the good, the area becomes revitalized, right? Mm-hmm. Things are renovated, things look better. The cons, maybe not so much, are people like the elderly who don't want to leave, people who are being priced out of the area and have to move. Not even, I've read some homeowners around here basically being harassed into selling because the developers are trying to use that area for.
Well, yeah, and that's certainly something that you hear about every once in a while. There's actually a famous case out of, I want to say it's Seattle, where there was a large development going in a shopping mall, and there was one elderly woman who just refused to sell. And so they literally built it right around her lot. There was just her little lot with her house there, and then the mall was all around, around it on three sides. But I think those particular cases are somewhat fewer and farther between when it's a coercion type of situation. I don't see that as being a primary concern. I look at the primary concerns more as what can we do and what can really local government do to mitigate effects on people that are negatively impacted, and to promote development in a way that doesn't have as many of the negative effects.
I do agree with that, but I do think it's important to point out why it's like that to begin with. And I think, to be honest with you, corporations in general, or companies, they're looking to make a profit, and it just doesn't seem like they care terribly much about what they do to get that profit. Now, I understand corporate ethics, is hit or miss, because they don't have to. It's a free market, it's, capitalism. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's a really large sort of a philosophical point, I suppose, of who should have responsibility for what. And the way that our economic system has developed, for better or worse, is corporations don't need to have a morality, except to the extent that it might help them profit. Certainly we see companies that, do things like, promoting, strong environmental policies. We're good on the environment, that sort of thing. A lot of people would argue that they should only be doing that to the extent that effectively helps them market. And I can see why you would say that and say, okay, well, the corporation's realm isn't to do good. The corporation's realm is to make profits. And then whose realm is it to do good? I think that the way that I fall on it is that, and I consider myself a capitalist, absolutely, but I think that there has to be appropriate government regulation, because there is no such thing as a free market. A market is a construct, and it has to be created and enforced by a government of some kind. So I think that there are appropriate ways that local government can use its levers to positively impact, and if you want to say force the corporations to do some things that are good, okay, great. Let's force them to do that through laws. The way that people are forced to do things through laws. That's a part of our being a society. So I don't think necessarily that a corporation needs to have a moral compass about it. I think that that should be done through regulation.
Okay, well, that's fair enough, because that's something I believe in as well. But it just, I don't know, it's just something that's always kind of bothered me a little bit, I guess.
I think, and it's a little bit of a tangent, but the corporation is still made up of people, and that's one of the things that it just frustrates me to no end is the the bullshit where your heads of corporations are never liable for anything that the corporation does, and you can just close a corporation and open another one, as opposed to them going to jail for criminal things that their corporation did, which I think should happen. So I think that there's more responsibility in that sense that should be put on the people behind the corporation, and maybe less protective shield given to having that corporation. Just because you have a corporation shouldn't be licensed to to break the law that you would be guilty of if you were doing it as a person.
Exactly. Yeah, I think we're on the same page on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that I'm completely legally off base as hell on that, but I think morally there's some firm ground there.
Okay, so we've talked kind of about what it is, what the pros and cons are, kind of a brief thing. So what the fuck can we do? Where can we find the balance?
Well, and that's what it is. That I think you hit on exactly the right word. It's balance. We can't just not change. I mean, change is a constant. Neighborhoods are going to change. And not to plug my own show, but I actually have an episode that should come out either before or after you hear this, because I don't know when this is coming out, where I talk about NIMBYism, not in my backyard, which is very related to gentrification. It's almost the flip side of it. NIMBYism is more the wealthy community that doesn't want to integrate or have things near their community that they don't that they think they're better than, I guess. And gentrification is sort of the opposite. It's where you've got the impact on the communities with less power. And so I think we mitigate that by having responsible government that does put in some provisions so that development can't just run wild without giving something back. And I think that's the key, is that there has to be some give and take, and there has to be some things given back to the community. And whether that is, different places have done it in a lot of different ways. One way is, okay, for every X units or dollars or whatever you develop, you have to build X percentage of that in affordable housing units. And that could be defined in various ways. I usually see it as an income threshold. You have to have a certain number of, say it's apartment units, you have to have a certain number that are subsidized. Say that it's for sale condos or townhomes or something like that. They'll have a certain number where they have to sell them to people who qualify based on income standards, having a below a maximum income number. And then that'll be restricted on the deed so that for, I think it's usually 20 or 30 years, any future sale of that has to be sold to someone who is also income qualified. And there's, I'm sure, some cost of living formulas or things like that. So there are some pieces that can be done that way. They can say, hey, if you want to build a bunch of housing on top of this old neighborhood, you have to give up a little something and help out with, at least to an extent, providing some housing that's affordable for the community that's already here.
Yeah, but there's a lot of companies that don't do that, though.
Well, it depends on, it depends on where you are, really. And it depends on what the local, be it, sometimes it's at the state level, sometimes the county or town level. That's a matter of pressuring local politicians to require that in development, because they are the ones that have the most control over what's going to happen with what type of development will be allowed and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and of course you're talking about politicians. They like, I don't want to generalize, but they seem to like money, and of course there's lobbyists.
Yeah, and that's where it is difficult, because the developers have they don't have endless pockets. They only have pockets deep enough that what they want to accomplish with the development is still going to financially make sense. So their pockets aren't endless, but the local government doesn't represent. Well, they do. They may represent the developer, but they probably represent a whole lot more people than that. And I think that that's one of the things that organizing within a community can change and can bring pressure on those local officials to respond to the people that they represent.
And you're hitting on one of the points I was going to bring up. Local residents kind of banding together and trying to keep their neighborhood intact.
Well, and I think beyond that, I think that when groups do that, they're wise to go beyond just their boundaries. It doesn't have to just be their neighborhood. They can bring in other people from around the city who are in danger of being the next area that's going to undergo the same kind of development. With some foresight and some organization, I think that's a way to exert the people's pressure versus the developer. But at the same time, you also have to consider what the limits on the power of that local government is, because they don't have ultimate power to dictate what can be done with a certain piece of property, because obviously the owner of that property has the right to sue whoever that government entity is, saying, hey, they diminished my value by doing this, and you can end up with a town paying out a lot in lawsuits. So that's where you can't just look to the government official and say, hey, you have to stop this, you have to stop this. It helps when you make sure that you try to get an understanding. If you're trying to fight gentrification in your area, or not necessarily fight it, but shape it, I think is a better word, to get to know what the specific issues in that area are. Go talk to or email whoever it is, the mayor, the planning commission, find out who it is in your area, and find out what it is that they actually can do before you just start yelling. Because that's something that we've actually dealt with it in my town, where there's been quite a bit of development, and people have been very loudly angry at our town council. Now, here it has more to do with the opposite side, the NIMBYism, rather than the gentrification. But we would have groups of residents basically going down, screaming at town council members to do something that legally they just couldn't do, because people do own land and have rights there that are associated with it. They can't just come in and say, nope, you can't do anything with your land because the people here would rather have it be a park. They can't. That can't be done.
I mean, I see what you're saying. People need to harness that anger.
Right. And I think people need to be realistic too, and think about what are the generational cycles that are at play here. If you look back, and this isn't going to apply the same way in every place or every town, but it's pretty common throughout the U.S., especially in sort of your newer large cities, places more out west, or places where you didn't have a whole lot going on before 1900 or so. A lot of them have gone through a very similar cycle where you had the close-in city originally built and primarily white working class. Then you had the white flight to the suburbs with the baby boom generation, and you left these hollowed out cores of the city where new immigrants, minorities were able to find a place that they could afford to be. And now you've got the kids of those boomers, or even later millennials, wanting to move back into the city. They don't want to live out in the boring burbs where they grew up with their parents. They want to move into the city. So there's a shift that goes back and forth across generations, and I think we're just seeing a lot of the effects of that right now because of the post-war baby boom and the demographics that have gone along with it.
Yeah, I thought about that myself. I mean, like you said, the white flight left out the hollowed out cores. Now they're now it's cool again, I guess, to live in town or whatever.
Yes, yeah, exactly. One thing that I think has been done that hasn't necessarily been approached well is in a lot of cities you've seen a lot of public investment into creating these downtown entertainment centers, whether it's in San Antonio, a Riverwalk, or in Denver, it's lower downtown, or wherever you are, that used to be, it was a really blighted area. And then downtown LA is a good example. So you've had a lot of investment and incentives, public, being transferred to the private companies that are going to develop and own these entertainment districts and then be able to build hotels and feel like they're, literally playing Monopoly. Build some houses, build some hotels. And that they've done that hoping for, the fucking trickle down, which never trickles. And so I think we're starting to see a shift away from that, where things like public financing of stadiums is finally turning to be a dirty thing, which is what it is. It's ridiculous to think, this poor NFL owner, he needs a stadium. We better make the taxpayers pay for it. So I think, as we've shifted there, maybe there'll be some room to pressure local governments to do better for the people that are there, rather than for the large, often out of area developers. And not to demonize developers. I work with them all the time. I love developers. A lot of them do great stuff. But there have been a lot of breaks given, and that's the kind of thing that we, those of us, of sort of like mind in social justice, that's a place to put our energies, is to make the local governments more accountable to us.
Yeah, I think that's one of the other things, like you just said, local governments. We have to get out there and pressure them to do the thing that we think is right.
Yeah. And, it's something that I've become very in tune with for the first time in my life, really, over the last handful of years, as there's been some major local politics things, especially with the school board in my district, which is a mess that just keeps on giving. They're at the Supreme Court about every year now. And it's given me a lot of thought of, we really need to do more with our local governments, because yes, we, of course, national elections fucking matter. We know that for damn sure. But in a lot of ways, to our individual lives, local matters, maybe even more.
Yeah, definitely. So we've kind of hit on a couple of things, community organizing, I guess, and not just one area. It's always good to have more, community buy-in in an entire region if you can get it in.
And I think it's good for communities too, if they have something like that, where maybe they find a similar community, even if they're across town, but they're facing the same issues, to stand together. Then they get to stand together on issues for both of them. And more is better.
Definitely. So that's a good thing we can do as citizens, I guess, and the community is try to do that. Like you said, you need some government interaction there, maybe. What are some things local government can do, you think, in cooperation with these citizens councils or whatever you want to call it?
Well, one of the things that they can do is they can't necessarily say change the zoning of something. That's not always something that a town council can do, and they especially can't do it if it's in response to a specific development plan. So their hands can be tied with regard to zoning, but they can do other things where they can they can slow down development by literally just by stretching out the process of building permitting. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is it makes things harder for people maybe in other areas of the city to build. So they have to balance those things. Something else that they can do, and this is going to depend on the specific areas, they can a neighborhood could come to a town council and say, we think we've got a lot of old buildings here and a lot of them are being torn down. We want it to be designated as a historic district. And there's pluses and minuses to that. It restricts, makes it a little more difficult if someone wants to paint their house a weird color or something like that because they have to go through approvals. But it literally preserves the character of a neighborhood when they designate it historic. It can go both ways on property values with that. There can be some benefit to it, but there can also be some difficulty with it just because that can make it more difficult to even say put a new roof on when you need one. I think one of the things that local government can do, that's probably the biggest thing that they can do, is if the citizens of an area are talking to them, rather than just kind of yelling, we don't want development, which is what we do see a lot, is citizens talk to the city, talk to the developer, everyone starts talking to each other, and there can be room for changes to development plans that can benefit everyone. Can you move the park from over on the other side of this new development to the side by us, and then, add some, maybe the developer will pay for some beautification on the adjacent streets that aren't even within their new development. There are things that you can negotiate, whether they're written into law or not, simply by saying, hey, you can have the support of our community if you work with us on X, Y, and Z. So it's not just laws. It's also just talking to each other. Right.
But I don't know how, throughout the nation, but how willing are local governments to do that, though? That's the question.
How willing are the governments to talk to the people, or
no? I'm sorry, the developers. I mean,
they're generally pretty open to it, because for the developer, if they have resistance from a community, whether or not they know that they're going to win in the end, they also know that they can easily get tied up for, even a few months can be a big deal, but they could get tied up for a year or more, and that's real money to them. So there's that pressure of just saying, hey, we as a community can either go to the town planning meetings with you and say, you know what, we've talked to them, and as a community we're in support, or we can fight you every step of the way, and maybe you win in the end, Mr. Developer, but you will have spent a lot of money on some legal fees and all of the time that you have not had to start building. So they are receptive to it. I mean, I've been in meetings with developers specifically about those things.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's fair enough. I just didn't know, there's always going to be that company that just refused. Because I was reading, well, we let's go ahead and say that you shared with me a Denver Post series about this issue.
Yeah, and it's been a big issue here in Denver, but it's a big issue everywhere, and I think a lot of the problems are the same in a lot of the cities where it's happening. So yeah, the Denver Post had done a series of several articles and opinions on gentrification from all sorts of sides. So we, I'm sure you can link those in your notes so that people can refer to them.
Okay, well that's cool. Yeah, we definitely need think people need to read up on this. I don't think just sitting here two white guys talking about this stuff.
Well, it's yeah. I mean, you're definitely right from that standpoint, and I do, as far as background and even profession go. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily on the side of development or the side of not development, but I'm probably more pro-development as a whole than I typically get from the social justice community and from the pro-minority community, but I think you know what I mean. I do come at it from a little bit of a different perspective as far as the property rights that are involved, just because I deal with that regularly.
And that's fair enough. Maybe you should. We never actually said what you're kind of.
Oh, what I do?
Yeah. Why you're even on here to talk about this anyway?
Yeah. Actually, that would be a good thing to mention. So we talked about I have a new podcast, Reasonable Risk, which tackles is often the similar issues, but from a standpoint of risks and rewards and decision making. I take that from and give it to my business, which I'm a residential real estate broker, and I recently opened my own brokerage called Reason Real Estate, the foundation of which is to use skeptical thinking and means of inquiry and data to be more scientific, not taking the emotion out of a real estate purchase, but more understanding of what the different things are that go into it. So through my real estate career, and also because I've had some of these things crop up very close to me locally, I've been involved with some infill developments in cities where, a house or a few homes are bought, torn down, small development put up, or also some major development where, for example, the old airport in Denver, Stapleton, which has now been closed for 20 years, so it was giant airport property, and it's been developed out over the last 20 years, and they're still doing some development. But in building that, and still to this day, as they continue to build it, they offer those, what I was talking about, those deed restricted, income restricted units. So there'll be a handful of condos, say, that might normally sell for $300,000 or a little more, that might be at $200,000, but you have to income qualify for them, things like that. So I've dealt with some of these issues just personally. I also lived in a gentrifying neighborhood in Los Angeles from, let's see, I bought in when were prices the highest? I bought then. I bought whenever the worst possible time was, 2005. So I lived in a gentrifying neighborhood for several years. And I got to, see and experience it firsthand there as whitey, not as the original community.
Oh, you're evil.
I don't think I did what one of the hopes always with gentrification is, especially if it's not new, not a lot of new construction, if it's an area where it's more renovations and remodels, is as houses turn over and they're remodeled and the exterior maybe is brightened up and things like that, it increases the appeal of the whole neighborhood. I unfortunately had neither the skills nor the vision at the time to brighten up my neighborhood by actually doing anything correctly to enhance my house. I did many things incorrectly, but but nonetheless, I persisted, and I lived in gentrifying neighborhood until getting out of California.
Mr. Shaker.
Yes, I've been yes, I've been whitey all my life, and I guess it works. It works for me. I actually through you and a lot of the podcasters out there like you and in the movement has actually helped me to realize a lot of how insanely privileged I've had it really all my life. So I thank you for bringing me down the several notches that I'm sure that I should have always been.
Oh, well, no problem. Apparently, I'm good at that part.
Yeah, yeah, you're good about making people feel bad about growing up in the Tony North suburbs of Chicago.
Yeah, that's what SJWs do,
Yeah, well, but I do actually have some Southern in my family. My father grew up in Memphis, and so I've got half my family is Memphis or from the Memphis contingent, but they're a little different than most Tennesseans because they're Jews. So I know that most Tennesseans, is it still this way? Do most of them still think Jews have horns?
No, actually, Jews are the second biggest group behind Christians.
It's like second biggest. It's 99%, and then Jews are 0.7, and there's that one mosque that got everyone all upset somewhere around there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, all the Muslims are taking all the heat now. So.
Yes. Well, everyone knows that we members of the tribe have run the world for years. I'm not sure how it ties in with the reptilians, but I know it does somehow.
I hadn't heard that, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean,
so someone more educated than me on the world of the Illuminati will have to shed some light on that for us.
Definitely. I did want to mention a brief anecdote from my own experience as far as gentrification or whatever. And it's only been, and that's one of the reasons I started thinking about it more, was because Nashville, like I said earlier, has just gone batshit with it. I mean, I work downtown, and I walk from the Nashville Sounds built a stadium, which is, I guess you could argue, is part of it. Sort of, I mean, it was a city thing.
The Nashville what?
Sounds. It's a minor league baseball team.
Oh, okay. That would have two things that I know nothing about: minor league and baseball.
Well, fair enough. But yeah, I've been. It started, and I have seen the ugliest fucking condos go up everywhere, and it just doesn't even look like they're supposed to be there. They're just popping up. I mean, everywhere, and you have to understand.
Well, there's a lot of places that have done that with ballparks, because I know Memphis did that, and because they had built, can't remember who their minor league team is, but they had built a downtown stadium, and my wife's from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and they built a stadium, a baseball stadium for the, I don't know, Fort Wayne Fuck-Alls, whatever they are. They did that, build the downtown, try to make downtown cool again, kind of thing. And actually, that is what spurred early gentrification in Denver, was when they built Coors Field. They built Coors Field in lower downtown, which was railroad tracks and crack horse, basically, and turned it into now it's insanely priced, awesome lofts and stuff. So that goes back over 20 years here. But for whatever reason, the baseball stadiums have done that. So in Nashville, now is Vanderbilt right there too?
Okay, so I guess it's not just a baseball stadium. I've seen them popping around other places. And they have even gone out to the immediate suburbs and started doing this shit with that. And there's an area called the Gulch where it's the worst for me. It's like hipster paradise or whatever.
Come on. You know you're a hipster at heart.
I hate it there. Hate it. I hate, especially down in the middle of it. I can't even tell where I am.
You hated it before it was cool to hate it.
Exactly, because I've been here for a while, so I see what kind of shit.
How long have you been in Nashville?
Well, my parents, my dad was in the military, but they were from here, so this
okay. So it's always been home base, even though you had moved around.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So I've been here. Not that I was paying attention the whole time. There used to be porno shops downtown, right there. So, it's not like Times Square.
I don't think it's gentrification that killed the porno shops.
No. And that's not what I think what pisses me off the most is the lack of kind of oversight. And like we were saying, like local oversight. Why are they just letting them build shit willy-nilly that doesn't even look right, doesn't blend in with a current neighborhood? There's got to be something.
That's actually a really good point, because it depends greatly, and this is why it's very difficult to talk about gentrification on a national level, because real estate laws are all local. Everything is local, so we don't necessarily know why it is that they are allowing all this sorts of building, or when they did the zoning plan, things like that. Once a zoning plan is put into place, generally, it can be pretty hard to change it. So it would be a matter of looking at that and say, did they, there's two things that you would look for as a citizen that might look at a new project and say, something doesn't seem right here. So the first thing you want to do is, most places you can actually look up the zoning online. You can get a zoning map of the county or the city, whoever the zoning entity is. So you would want to look that up and say, okay, what was that zoned for, and when was it done? Was it done last year, or was it done 30 years ago? Because that makes a difference. And if it was done last year, then there's still room for somebody who may be impacted, who would have standing. Say maybe that maybe you own a place right near there that is going to, this is going to cause some kind of issues for you. So you can go look and see, okay, has this zoning been there longer than I've been here? If it has, then, I probably should have looked back then, but you can still look for some other things. And then the other piece that you want to do is you want to see if whoever the permitting entity is, sometimes it's a town council, sometimes it's a planning commission, something like that. You want to see if they've been granting a lot of variances to zoning. Because if they have, I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but that's a good indication that someone might be in a developer's pocket. Would be, it's zoned this way, but no one's really paying attention, so we'll give you the variance to increase the housing density by 50% and build it, 4 stories taller. So there are some things that you can try to look for specifically if there's a specific development that might be causing problems.
Well, I do know that Nashville's pretty aggressive in giving tax increment financing.
Ooh, okay.
So that has probably encouraged them to come there and do this shit.
Yes, definitely. And that's, we see that everywhere. I hate it. I think it can be used if used in a very limited, targeted way. I think maybe it can work, but overall, it drives me nuts, because they used it here for a Costco. And it's like, I look at that Costco and I'm like, God, that Costco is not going to have to actually pay the sales tax that I'm paying to them for, 10 years or something. What kind of bullshit is that?
Yeah, that's always bothered me. And I understand why they did it, to get people there, but they just went overboard with it.
Right. And those are the kind of things, I think, to look at, good place that people don't do this anymore. a really good place to look is people should get their local newspaper, at least on Sunday. Look at the opinion section, look at the business section. People don't do that anymore. We look on the internet and we see news about things that are happening elsewhere, and it's important things that are happening elsewhere. But I really encourage people to look at your local paper because you'll learn a lot about what's going on.
Yeah, our paper's gotten a little better. Tennessee used to be pretty rag.
Well, but let me put it this way. Even if they suck, even if they skew everything in the exact opposite direction that you would want them skewed, at least it's a starting point that might give you the indication of, hey, I need to look more into this.
Yeah, that's true. All right, well, I think you've covered most of the stuff. There's not a good answer.
No, absolutely, there's not a good answer. I do want to just let any of your listeners know, if there's a specific development project or something like that in your area that you just noticed and you're kind of interested in figuring out what's going on, feel free to contact me. I like looking into that stuff and doing a little research and that sort of thing. So feel free to contact me. Be happy to look at things for you.
And you've segued nicely into the ending part where you tell me all your information.
Oh, yes. Well, what do we start with? Last for my social?
Sure.
So you can find me on the Reasonable Risk podcast. What I like to suggest for people to do is whichever podcatcher or whatever you use, I don't care. You go subscribe on Stitcher, you subscribe on all of them because, just good tip for you. So reasonableriskpodcast.com, Twitter @ReasonBroker, and at the Reasonable Risk show page, there's all my direct contact info and that sort of thing. So I've really enjoyed talking about this with you, Chris. It's nice actually getting to speak with you. We do this, get to know people, online for a long time and not interact personally so much. So it's always nice when I get to do that. Yeah,
that's why this is kind of a tangent, but last night I did my second Atheist at the pub thing here, and
I saw that. You had posted that on Facebook, and I saw that, and every time I see that, I go, I wish I could go. It just sounds cool, and there's there's a happy hour here in Denver that I go to sometimes. That's a secular secular gathering. Those things are great. I really encourage people to do them.
That's why I started, because I need a reason to get out of the house at least once a month. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't do it.
All work and no play makes Chris a dull boy.
Unless he's drinking, then it's Facebook karaoke.
I would say that's play.
So, all your information's out there. I also wanted to mention again that Mr. Schaefer is a patron of the show. So that means I have to kiss his ass a little more.
I don't attach strings like that. I just no. Honestly, I like to. I love the model where we can encourage, whether it's activists or artists or whoever it is, really directly through something like Patreon. So. I enjoy listening to your show, and I really appreciate having me on. Thanks.
No problem. And hopefully, I'll get to talk to you, more often, except other than just messaging back and forth.
Absolutely, we'll do it again soon.
Okay. Well, one last. I want to do a kind of a recap, just real quick.
Sure.
So we're fucked. Is that right? No,
well, some of us are fucked, and some of us fuck. I don't know. That didn't sound good.
Yeah. You're either the fucker or the fucky, or something like that.
Yes.
No, I'm just some of the tips that we kind of came up with is basically start, have a local group that looks into these things as far as development goes, and try to be more vocal about, actually pay attention to what's going on. I think
that's lesson number one, really, is pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on around you. One thing that I forgot to mention is for anyone that is, in situations like this, that's a renter, that's facing, rent increases, that sort of thing. Make sure you know what your landlord is actually allowed to do, rather than just accepting that what they tell you is true. There are places, certainly not everywhere, but there are places that have rent control, whether they call it that or not. So if you're in a situation where you're a renter, you get a big, hey, your rent's going up, next month. What I really encourage you to do, because again, that's a very localized thing as far as what tenant-landlord law is. In most places, there's like a legal aid society or something like that. Just type in Google legal aid and wherever you are. And they will generally talk to you for free and help you out with if there's something that you can do to fight this.
Okay, good deal. I know there's a legal aid here. I generally idea of the location. So yeah, definitely check that out. Pay attention to what's going on around you, which is good advice anyway. Kind of talk to your politician, your local politicians.
Right. Don't forget about the local. Don't forget about the local politics while we're all up in arms and in horror daily at the Washington shenanigans. Don't forget about your local issues, because those are going to impact your life in a lot of ways.
Exactly. So I encourage regardless of what the issue is, but this one, but many other issues, just be aware of what's going on.
Exactly.
And this kind of thing is less likely to happen if you're kind of on top of it and you see that somebody's getting some financing that maybe isn't too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
say something.
I know we're wrapping up, but that brought up something to mind that I've just got to share, and this is in conjunction with development in my town, which many people have thought is just out of control, out of hand. I don't really agree with that point of it. But there was a proposal to put a hotel into our little downtown area. And while I actually thought the idea of it was pretty good, and a lot of people in the town didn't like it for one reason or another, it was actually stopped because it looked like, and I don't think anything was necessarily legally problematic, but there were some casual ties between some city council or city council adjacent people and whoever was developing this thing. So you never know what you're going to find that might stop something you don't want to have happen. Things like that. It's usually just regular people that find these things out. It is not some lawyer somewhere. Nobody's doing this for you. This is something that that often it's just you yourself doing some Googling and requesting some documents and things like that can actually have an impact.
All right, it's a good deal. That's a good point for us to go ahead. And even though I kind of did out of order, that's okay. I think we got to go log that information out here about the situation, about the subject.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Chris.
All right, man. Well, you take it easy.
You too.
That'll do it for this episode of the Podunk Polymath Podcast. I want to thank Michael Schaefer for coming on and talking to me. We had a great conversation, and while we didn't come to any definite conclusions, I think it was important we have that conversation, and it needs to be had more often, to be honest with you, because, like I said, it's one of those things that hit close to home considering how bad Nashville is gentrifying, and I feel like we need to have a discussion about this because things are getting out of control. So we need to figure some shit out. But anyway, I want to apologize for the sound quality. I didn't notice till after the fact that for some reason apparently it went through the laptop mic and not my regular mic. I don't know what happened, and it sounds like absolute shit on my end. So you can still understand it, but it sounds like crap. So I want to apologize, especially considering in contrast to his sound, which is like fucking ridiculously awesome. So yeah, I apologize for the sound quality. Hopefully it doesn't detract too much from the conversation, which is an important one. I also wanted to mention that, of course I should have mentioned it before, but you know me, forgetting shit. I got a new logo. Well, it's the same logo, but it's spiffied up a bit. It's got a new color scheme, and the writing, the Podunk Polymath podcast, has been white shadowed, what do you call it? Drop shadow with white. I want to thank Jeff Preberg for doing that for me. Jeff Preberg Jr. He's on Twitter at Pitt Atheist, P-I-T-T Atheist. He's my friend on Facebook, and he's a cool dude, so definitely go check him out. Of course, if you want to check the podcast out, the main page is thepodunkpolymath.com. Of course, the music is done by ... which is cdbaby.com/cd/... You can check me out on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Google Plus under the Podunk Polymath. Email is podunk.polymath@gmail.com. Also, you can come to the Patreon page and become part of the posse. Patreon.com/thepodunkpolymath. Call-in phone number 615-378-POPO 7676. You can join the Podunk Polymath Podcast Posse Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/the Podunk Polymath Podcast Posse, all separated by periods. And of course, the online store is zazzle.com/podunk_polymath. If you look on the sidebar, you'll see you can follow me on WordPress. You can see my tweets and follow me on Twitter, donate via PayPal, subscribe on RSS, Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher, and there's also a Patreon button, as well as recent posts and recent comments. Of course, I forgot about one other thing, again. The live show, the 1-year Podunkiversary is coming up. That'll be next weekend, 7:30 to 9:30, next Saturday. It'll be YouTube Live. I'm going to put up a link beforehand so you can well, it's not really calling in, but come into the Hangouts, it's Google Hangouts. And if you go through the link, you can come on the show and say whatever the fuck you want. I'm going to try to keep it where not everybody's talking at once. So if you come through and it doesn't go through, that's because somebody else is talking, unless for some reason we have more than, I don't know what the fuck's going to happen. There might be karaoke. There might be sex. I don't know. You never know what's going to happen on the Podunk Polymath 1-year anniversary, the 1-year Podunkiversary. It's going to be wild. So come and check it out. And I appreciate everybody who's listened to this show so far and made it this far. Helped me make it this far. It's greatly appreciated. Y'all are great for even listening to this when there's so many other fucking better podcasts out there than this one. And I'm humbled. So, and I'll do more of that next week in the 1-year show. I'll kind of talk more about that. But for right now, I'll just leave it at y'all are awesome. Okay? So, until next time, y'all take it easy now. Okay?